There was a woman in Troy named Cassandra. She was so beautiful that the god Apollo himself fell in love with her. He offered her a bargain no mortal would refuse, the gift of prophecy. Cassandra accepted the gift, then rejected the god. Apollo didn't forgive the slight, and because he couldn't take the gift back, he poisoned it. He cursed her to see the future with perfect clarity, but to be believed by no one. She saw betrayals hidden behind friendly faces. She saw endings before beginnings. She warned that Troy would burn to ash. Its leaders laughed, called her mad, and kept celebrating while the disaster was already crossing the threshold. The city fell exactly as she had screamed. Some people live under that same sentence without any god touching them. Their mind never stops. They spot patterns nobody else notices. They carry the weight of a consciousness running at full power, hour after hour, without rest. They convince themselves that the constant mental noise, the voice that analyzes everything, must be their greatest strength. They don't yet see it's also their greatest torture. It keeps you scanning for threats, rehearsing conversations, and predicting endings that never arrive. This video is about the hidden mechanism that turns your sharpest mind into the source of your exhaustion. You'll learn why the voice in your head doesn't just refuse to go quiet, but actively blocks you from living the life you keep analyzing. And most importantly, what you can do with it starting today, before your gifts become your prison. Life, before it can be understood, is meant to be lived. Living is the real purpose. In its purest state, existence isn't an abstract theory to solve, but an experience you have to pass through in the body. Think about it. When a child learns to walk, they don't consult a manual or wait for Nietzsche to explain balance. They wobble, fall, scrape a knee, get back up, and try again without commentary. That is life in its rawest form. Trial, error, and constant movement. As we grow, something inside us shifts. The fear of failing begins to freeze us. Direct experience no longer feels sufficient, and we start to believe absolute certainty is the only safe response to the world. We learn that if you plan ahead, you avoid embarrassment. Suddenly thinking feels like a shortcut, a hack that can spare you the pain of mistakes. For a while it works. Introspection gives you control, and life starts to look like a grid you can navigate, predict, and manage. But eventually, you cross a dangerous threshold where thought stops supporting life and starts replacing it. A glass prison. That's where the voice crosses the line. The inner narrator that comments on everything you do and punishes you for what you should have done differently. It's no longer a mild nuisance. It becomes a mechanism with a logic of its own. We've already touched on how that voice talks to itself, how it generates thoughts to answer other thoughts, and how it keeps alive the illusion that someone is listening. But in deep thinkers, it becomes the only way of being. Alan Watts put it with brutal clarity. A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts, so he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusion. A maze with no exit. To the outside world, you may look calm, even impressive. Inside, the mind is running a commentary track, grading your tone, predicting outcomes, replaying mistakes, rehearsing the next conversation. It calls this being prepared. In truth, it is keeping you on a treadmill. You can't rest because resting would mean facing the simple moment without a story. So you keep thinking, not to solve life, but to avoid feeling it. The longer it runs, the narrower you become. At first, this mental hypervigilance feels like an upgrade. You build a second layer of mind that watches the first, analyzing your patterns in real time. You feel ahead of everyone else, like Cassandra seeing the future while the city sleeps. But it has a cost that eventually crushes you. There are two ways to use the mind: reflection and rumination. Reflection moves towards resolution. Rumination is a loop that spins on its own axis with no end, searching for answers where there are only doubts. The deep thinker dissects the source of every thought, feeling, and impulse. Tracking an emotion to its root can feel liberating, but it can also become a trap with no real exit. Just a steady stream of melancholy dressed up as insight. Look at people who try to please everyone. If they hold a door for a stranger 1 second too long, that tiny moment can ruin their entire night. Their mind replays the scene 1,000 times, analyzing why they didn't let go sooner, what expression they should have used, how to avoid looking odd. That is recursive thinking. One layer watching another, and neither one ever resting. It's the price of knowing. You sit on the sidelines watching reality move forward while you get stuck inside the loop, until the loop starts to feel like the only way to be alive. And the most disturbing part is that each supposed breakthrough delivers a chemical reward, a hit of relief, a flash of control that keeps you hooked. Next, we'll see why the mind prefers the map to freedom. There's a reason this mental labyrinth doesn't feel like a problem at first. A revelation feels good. When your mind clicks loose pieces into place, you get a surge of relief. That sharp moment when chaos seems domesticated and something hidden steps into the light. For a second, the world makes sense. Your brain rewards this hard because it can't tell the difference between solving a real problem and solving a purely mental one. Both release the same chemical payoff. To your nervous system, clarity equals progress, even if nothing in your life has changed by an inch. That rush becomes a drug. It pushes you to keep digging, to keep explaining, to keep searching for the final answer that will let you rest. But the reward loop is circular. You feel better for a moment, then the discomfort returns, and you go back to the mind for another hit. Here's the trap. A network in the brain switches on whenever you don't have a concrete task to solve. It takes the controls like autopilot. In most people, it appears in pockets, in the shower, late at night, in a queue. In deep thinkers, it rarely powers down. Always-on awareness turns into always-on scanning. Your attention gets pinned inward. You start sensing psychological threats even when nothing is happening. Anxiety shows up without a cause. Sadness arrives without a clear trigger. Neutral moments feel loaded. Eckhart Tolle calls compulsive thinking a form of addiction. The mind uses you instead of you using it. For the deep thinker, the mechanism is sharper. It isn't only that thoughts keep coming, it's that the slightest hint of silence is treated as danger. The brain reads the gap and instantly produces a new question, a fresh worry, a new angle to chew on. Each revelation feels like you're almost there, as if one more insight will finally unlock peace. But the rest never arrives. The moment you solve one piece, another problem appears. Another pattern demands decoding. You become like a crow that keeps solving puzzles for a treat that no longer satisfies. There is a point where there is nothing left to win, only the habit of searching. It even gives you a burst of pride. The feeling that you are doing the work, that is the hook. Your body gets a reward for analyzing, so you chase analysis, not change. The map feels safer than the open road. You can spend years dissecting childhood memories and tracing every feeling back to its origin, and still not take a single real step forward. Understanding becomes a substitute for acting. The mind convinces you you're working, while relationships stall, choices are delayed, and life waits outside the door. Questioning the walls is still building the same cell. No one develops surveillance this intense without a powerful reason. That vigilance isn't accidental. So ask yourself, very precisely, when did you learn that the only safe place to live was inside your own head? And who benefited when you stopped trusting the world and started trusting only your analysis? To understand a deep thinker, don't look only at intelligence. Look at their first world, childhood, especially one that was complex and lonely. This way of being is rarely a conscious choice. It's a vital adaptation for a child trying to survive a difficult, hostile home. It begins as a brilliant, desperate strategy, forged in years when the ground under your feet could shake without warning. Perhaps you grew up with parents whose temperament changed like the weather. Affection could arrive, then vanish. Anger could arrive with the same force, just as suddenly. In that kind of house, constant hypervigilance is the most rational response a child can have. You learn to watch, to listen, to measure, and to predict. You became a master observer, using your mind to map the tiny tremors that come before an emotional eruption. Sometimes it was a slight shift in tone. Sometimes it was a silence so loaded it said everything. Your safety depended on how accurately you could read those turns and how quickly you could adjust yourself to them. That childhood hypervigilance didn't disappear. It went underground. Today, it shows up as the way you present yourself, the roles you adopt without question, and the permanent distance between what you show and what you actually feel. The strategy that once kept you safe has become the cage you can't find the key for. Spontaneity is a luxury for people who trust the world will hold them if they fall. For the child who didn't trust, the only safe place was the fortress of their own awareness. Your mind became a sealed laboratory. Inside it, you run the experiment 100 times before you risk the unpredictable reaction of the outer world. What was once necessary shelter becomes rigid structure. That is why, for you, being wrong isn't a minor inconvenience. It feels like existential desperation. If your value depends on seeing what others miss, a public mistake can feel like catastrophe, a threat to credibility itself. When identity fuses with analysis, a failure isn't just a wrong answer. It feels like the death of your source of validation. And like the mythic Cassandra, your deepest fear is being called mad for seeing a truth the rest of the world won't or can't admit. Speaking becomes dangerous. If you can't let your thoughts flow for fear of error, you become stiff around other people. The fear of ridicule keeps you frozen, far from a life that feels truly yours. Criticism stops being feedback. It lands as something violently personal. You become a mind policing itself, scanning for faults before anyone else can see them. You read hidden patterns so precisely that you lose the right to surprise. You start testing every sentence before you say it, checking your face, your tone, your posture. You rehearse a joke, then kill it. You sense the room for threats, not for connection. And because the world keeps moving while you self-monitor, you feel left behind, watching life happen through glass, certain that one wrong move will expose you. So what happens when seeing the code of reality ends up destroying the simple pleasure of being in the game? Do you remember Neo's choice in The Matrix? The blue pill or the red? For many people, seeing reality as it is feels like the only logical move, but seeing the code that holds the simulation together has a bitter price. When you're a deep thinker, the illusions that color ordinary life start dissolving in front of you, and you can't stop it. It becomes a one-way road into disenchantment, where the world loses its shine and everything starts to look explained. You start treating your own heart like a machine, and the very act of understanding becomes another barrier between you and experience itself. Suddenly, you notice the hidden strings behind what used to move you. Romance stops being mystery and becomes patterns of attachment, chemistry, and cold hormonal transactions. Your career turns before your eyes into a ladder of incentives, roles, and status signals. Even friendship can feel like exchange. The whole world begins to feel hollow, not because nothing matters, but because the technical explanation has replaced the wonder you once felt in simple moments. You become a passive spectator who narrates your own anxiety in clinical terms while you're still feeling it. Instead of letting fear land in the body and pass, you stand back and dissect it. Instead of simply tasting joy, you label it, classify it, and file it away for later in a dark corner of the mind. This hyperconsciousness kills flow, that total surrender where time disappears, the sense of me fades, and action moves by itself. The joy of flow comes from a temporary absence of identity, a brief death of ego where you vanish, and yet everything is fine. It's an organic certainty that doesn't need to ask, "Am I doing this right?" It simply does. What some traditions call no mind, the state where the observer dissolves and you exist without analysis, is exactly what the deep thinker has lost without noticing. They don't seek it because they can't remember the feeling. They only know something essential is missing in the chest, like a muscle that forgot how to relax. And just when you're about to sink into a moment of beauty, you trip over yourself. Self-observation switches on and interrupts everything, ruining the magic of spontaneity. It's what happens to athletes when they lose their natural timing. Their movements turn awkward, as if their legs were made of noodles. They've lost the trust required to release the reins of the conscious mind. To return to the game, you have to trust enough to let go of control. But for us, that invisible, heavy grip is not nearly as easy to drop as it sounds. So what happens when the observer decides its job isn't only to watch, but to direct every action, like you're a character who can no longer change the script? Looking inward can be useful for learning from our most obvious mistakes, but there is an invisible line where reflection tips into pathological rumination. It is the precise moment your mind stops examining and starts policing every centimeter of your inner life, under the false belief that watching equals progress. It feels like safety, because if you can monitor every impulse, you can prevent embarrassment, rejection, or loss. Yet the surveillance creates the tension it claims to solve. You rehearse, edit, and correct yourself before you even act. You watch your tone, your posture, your facial expressions, as if life were an audition. The more you tighten the grip, the less spontaneous you become, and the more distant you feel from everyone else, including the version of you that was once effortless all along inside. You have become a mental panopticon, a prison built so a guard can survey everything from a central tower without rest, tracking every shadow cast on the walls of your own psyche. At that critical point, the self splits cleanly into actor and ruthless critic. Choosing what to wear each morning or voicing an honest opinion no longer feels natural. It feels like a scene shot under cold, fluorescent lights of non-stop self-commentary that never switches off. Real emotions die and are replaced by labels. When something hurts, your mind classifies it quickly and files it away in a library of documented feelings. But they stay there, day after day, neither lived nor released from their cell. If you suddenly lose your job, instead of allowing the necessary panic or seeking comfort, you start hunting solutions with icy precision. You get the diagnosis right, but you miss the cure, the simple act of feeling. Eckhart Tolle spoke of the observer as awareness that can see thoughts without being dragged by them. That capacity to observe without judgment is exactly what the deep thinker turns into their sharpest trap. You take the tool of liberation and convert it into a permanent control system. You move from curious witness to severe warden, who orders you never to ruin anything. In this state of alert, your desperate search for authenticity becomes the most theatrical act of all. You are not checking whether you are true to who you are today, but whether you match an idealized self you feel compelled to defend in front of other people. You resemble those corporate social media accounts that analyze every message to sound warm, and yet everyone can tell they're painfully hollow. Your identity becomes a story built from data in your past, replayed on a loop. That is why you never truly change. Real change would break the narrative you work so hard to protect. Any deviation feels like a direct threat to the character you constructed with such care. You have become a perfect structure, polished, static, intolerant of faults. but structures that are too rigid cannot connect in any real way with living people inside a chaotic, changing world. What happens when the character you crafted so carefully realizes it speaks a language no one else truly understands anymore? There is a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of people, but from living in a future that hasn't landed in the present yet. You live in a constant time dislocation, like a foreigner inside your own era. Your mind has been reshaped around systems and trajectories most people don't even suspect exist. You can articulate a social need long before the world admits it has one. Being the misunderstood pioneer follows a predictable, bitter cycle. First, they mock your ideas. Then, they ignore you entirely. Finally, when time proves you right, they copy you without even remembering your name. That repeated lash leaves a deep distrust in your eyes, and you watch it happen in real time. People cheer for shortcuts you already know will fail. You warn them softly, and you're dismissed as pessimistic. Months later, the same mistake returns with a new name, and everyone acts surprised. Each round teaches you the same lesson. Stay quiet, stay safe. Don't offer your best to anyone else. You become more cautious. You stop sharing what you see out of sheer emotional self-preservation. Why speak when the result is always the same emptiness, the same suffocating silence? Your depth runs on a different clock from a society that rewards instant certainty and surface charisma. In meetings, the decisive thinker speaks first with clean, confident solutions and takes the applause. Your nuanced answer arrives later, when the conversation has already turned, and your truth sounds like an awkward interruption. It's a dull frustration to watch the simplest ideas receive all the credit, while your layers of analysis die in the shadow of forgetfulness. You don't avoid small talk out of arrogance. You simply don't have the key to enter it. For other people, that light conversation is a necessary human synchronization, a safety signal sent before anyone goes deep. Without that basic synchrony of glances and ordinary smiles, the bridge to the other person never gets built. It isn't that deep thinkers are alone. It's that they are rarely met by someone who speaks their language. That lack of real meeting accumulates year after year like an invisible, bitter sediment in the soul. Little by little, isolation stops being a mental feeling and becomes a physical weight that settles in the center of the chest. What happens when the whole system overheats and begins to shut down because it no longer has the strength to keep carrying the weight of its own accumulated loneliness in the cold silence? Depression in a mind that never rests rarely arrives like a dramatic storm that smashes the windows in a single blow. It comes more like a grey tide of mental fatigue, disguised as maturity, superior intelligence, or strong self-control. You don't feel broken. You feel worn down from the inside. It's the quiet shutdown of a biological system forced to run at full capacity without real relief. That 360-degree awareness becomes your own jailer, turning life into a heavy academic exercise you must justify and audit constantly before an internal court that never sleeps. Your brain behaves like a supercomputer running hyperreal simulations, processing reality and interrogating it obsessively. Does this matter? Is it relevant to maintaining my image? Eventually, the machine overheats. Life loses its natural color, its lightness, and that basic human right to make small mistakes without consequence. Everything feels heavy, inspected, and earned through effort that leaves you breathless. On top of that comes the burden of excessive empathy. You don't only manage your emotions, you generate entire emotional worlds for everyone around you, simulating their stress, their fear, their possible disappointment as if they were your own injuries. The system collapses because the human mind was never designed for this kind of multiple, suffocating processing. This descent doesn't always look like deep sadness. Clinically, it often shows up as numbness, a blunt inability to feel pleasure, a tide that makes everything taste flat. Many people assume depression requires a tragedy, but the daily exhaustion of living inside a mind that won't go quiet is profoundly underestimated by the society around us. The worst part is the constant guilt of feeling bad for no reason. Guilt that drives you back into the same habit that is destroying you. Analyzing harder, monitoring more, hunting for a logical fault that simply isn't there. Notice what happens when you try to fix it by thinking harder. You schedule more self-improvement, more research, more inner commentary. Yet the body keeps signaling overload. Shallow breath, tight jaw, numb eyes. The more you interrogate yourself, the less human you feel. That is the paradox. Analysis becomes avoidance, and the silence you need stays unreachable. This is where the myth of Cassandra offers the only exit from the labyrinth. The escape isn't defeating the God who gave you the bitter gift of sight. It's stopping the attempt to outsmart the curse with more thinking. The cure was never to collect more technical knowledge or pile up more personal revelations. The real way out is to allow yourself pleasures with no use, no point, no optimization. To live moments that aren't designed to produce anything. To say the awkward thing that just crossed your mind without filtering it 3 times out of fear of judgment. To make the clumsy move you keep avoiding. To step into experience before the mind has finished its audit. Let yourself, for once, be seen as wrong in public. Play the fool without excuses. Release the reins of control that are burning your hands. Cassandra suffered because she was condemned to be an eternal witness. Someone who watched and warned but never truly participated in the making of the shared world. Her pain wasn't seeing the future. It was the inability to intervene in it with her own living body. But you are not her. Unlike the woman of Troy, who could only describe what she saw, you have hands and a will. You can act. And doing something that changes the direction is infinitely better than sitting still while a silent prophecy plays out. So what happens if today you decide that seeing the code is no longer enough, and you dare to break it by making an error that has no logical justification for your inner warden? And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.